I was the 11th keeper of the Arden Ring, and for most of my life I believed I would also be the last. Not because anything was wrong with the ring, but because nothing had ever come to it. 300,000 years of silence does that to a post. You stop expecting the silence to break. You just keep the lights burning anyway, because that was the promise, and a promise outlives the person who made it. The ring hangs high above Earth, a structure of pale alloy ribs wrapped around something far older than the alloy, the fossilized spine and skull of Torval, the last of the great guardian beasts that walked this world before the war that nearly ended it. We built the ring around those bones, the way you build a cathedral around a relic, not to worship it, to remember what it cost. 300,000 years ago, a war band called the Skell Reavers came to Earth in the last days of a war they were losing elsewhere, looking for one more world to bleed before they ran. They didn't come to conquer. They came to salt the ground. They seeded the oceans and the high atmosphere with a cascade weapon, a thing that didn't kill outright, but rewrote. It unmade species into other species, generation by generation, faster than evolution, slower than mercy. Torval died defending the last unscarred coastline on the planet, and by the time it fell, the Reavers had already fled into the dark, certain they'd left nothing behind worth a second visit. They were wrong about that. They were wrong about almost everything. My duty, and the duty of every keeper before me, was simple to say and immense to do. Keep the beacon lit and keep the registry. The Cascade weapon didn't just touch Earth. The Reavers had used it for 40 years across a dozen systems before they ever reached us, and every population it touched kept living, kept changing, kept having children. Earth's first generation after the war, broken, furious, grieving, made a choice that took 300 millennia to pay off. They didn't build warships first. They built listening posts. They tracked the Cascade's descendants. Every world the Reavers had infected, every drifting colony seeded with rewritten survivors, every lineage born from that weapon Earth found them, reached out to them, cataloged them, not as victims to pity, as kin to claim. The registry grew for 300,000 years. By the time I took up the post, it held the lineage records of 412 worlds, every one of them descended from something the Skell Reavers had broken and discarded. We never told most of them where the weapon came from. Not at first. That took generations of trust. But eventually, every one of those 412 worlds knew, and every one of them remembered. The ring's beacon broadcast on a single frequency, the Reavers' own old battle frequency, recovered from wreckage they'd left behind in their hurry to flee. For 300,000 years it said the same thing, over and over, in a language built from their own signal architecture. This world is not what you left. Come and see, if you dare. No one ever answered, not until the morning I'm telling you about. I was at the long window when the alert came through, not an alarm, just a soft chime. The kind the ring used for things that mattered but weren't yet emergencies. A single vessel, decelerating hard, on a vector that matched no trade lane and no registered approach. Old design. Reaver hull signatures. The kind we'd only ever seen in wreckage. My hands went cold before my mind caught up to why. I opened the channel. Not a warning. The registry. I sent them the roll call. I sent 412 world names, in order of when each lineage was found, each one tagged with a population count, a generation count, a single image chosen by that world itself to represent what they'd become. I sent the names of the Reavers' own dead, the crews of 3 scout ships they'd lost to the Cascade's backlash on their own people, names we'd recovered from the wreckage and kept, because somebody should. And I sent, last, an image of Torval's skull, lit from within by the ring's running lights, with a single line beneath it in their own old script. We kept this too. It took 11 minutes for them to answer. I know because I counted every one of them, standing at that window, watching their ship smaller than I'd imagined, scarred, patched a dozen times over with metal that didn't match, hang dead in space above a world they'd written off as a grave. When the reply came, it wasn't a weapons lock, though our own defense grid had already woken quietly, without fanfare, the way it always did. 490 platforms, and the long, dark shapes of the Inheritor fleet sliding into position not to threaten, but simply to be present, the way a door being closed gently is still a door closing. The Reavers would have seen all of it. Orbital rings beyond their own. Warships built from alloys their scanners couldn't immediately name. A planet that, by every measure their 300,000-year-old charts had recorded, should have been a corpse, and was instead the calmest, most crowded, most times, awake times, system any of their kind had approached in living memory. The reply was a voice, old accented, rough, translated a half-second behind itself by our systems, so I heard it twice, layered. We came to take what was left. There is nothing left to take. I didn't answer with triumph. I want to be honest about that, because I've heard this story told back to me since, in versions where I said something sharp, something that landed like a blade. I didn't. I'd spent my whole life as the keeper of a registry built on the idea that what happened to those 412 worlds mattered more than what happened to the people who'd broken them. Cruelty answered with, "Cruelty is just the weapon, working twice." I told them the truth instead. I told them that everything the Cascade had touched was still alive, still growing, still becoming things their ancestors could never have imagined and would probably not recognize as descended from anything they'd ever done, and that every one of those 412 worlds had, at one point or another, asked the same question. What happened to the ones who did this to us? And I told them that for 300,000 years, the answer had been, we don't know. We're still listening for them. Now we knew. There was a long silence after that, longer than the first one. I watched the Inheritor fleet hold its position, not closing, not retreating, just present. The way Earth had learned to be present, patient, exact, unhurried, because we had never once, in 300,000 years, been in a hurry about anything that mattered. When the voice came back, it was quieter. What do you want from us? I told them what the registry had always been for. Not a ledger of debts, an open channel. 412 worlds had already chosen, generations ago, to be found rather than to hide. And every one of them was better for it, not because Earth had forgiven anything on their behalf, but because being known, even by the world that had hurt you, was better than being forgotten by everyone, including yourself. I offered them the same thing, a place in the registry, not absolution. Not even welcome, exactly just a record. A line in a list that said, found on this date, after this long, by their own choosing. Or, if they preferred, safe passage out, the way they'd come, with the beacon's frequency released back to them, so they could find their own way home, if home still existed for them anywhere. They took the second. I won't pretend that didn't sting a little, after everything, but I understood it. 300,000 years is a long time to carry a story about yourself as a thing that ran. Some people aren't ready to stop being that story in a single afternoon, even when the alternative is offered with an open hand. Their ship turned, slow and careful, and burned away from Earth on the same vector it had arrived on. the beacon's old frequency trailing it like a thread let out behind a hand that might, someday, want to find its way back along it. I stayed at the window until their drive flare dimmed past the edge of the ring's shadow. Then I logged the entry, the 413th line, in a registry that had waited 300,000 years for it and would wait however long it took for a 414th. I didn't close the channel. We never do. The beacon still runs the same broadcast, on the same frequency, in the same old battle language. And it still says exactly what it always said. This world is not what you left. Come and see, if you dare. But now, underneath it, there's a second line. The one I added that morning, and the one every keeper after me will keep running for as long as the ring stands. And when you do, we'll already know your name.